Hi there, welcome to the Schwowin's Nest. My name is Sandra and I'm so glad you're here.
This is one of the first Easter projects that I did on my YouTube channel. I'm taking this large artist panel. It's 11 by 14, I believe, and some of these different paints. I'm going to be mixing up a couple of different colors of blue, and I'm going to be starting with a white background. I'm going to create a buffalo check pattern on this board just by using painter's tape. Start by putting one piece right across the top and then use a second piece, and that will be your spacer. Once you've got the third piece down, you just pull up the spacer piece and put it underneath the third piece, and you'll continue this process all the way down the board. I'm going to be moving back and forth between these two boards because with this clear tape that I'm using for this project, you can't really see the pattern that I'm creating. Once you've got all of your tape down, you're going to take your lightest color that you're going to be using, after white, of course, and paint in those stripes. And you can give them a full coverage or you can give them a distressed coverage, whatever you prefer. Once you've completed it, you can go ahead and remove the tape right away. You do not have to wait for the paint to dry, but you do need to let it dry for the next step. Now you'll do the same technique, but you're going to put the tape in the opposite direction. So you want to make sure that you really press down the tape that's going to be staying there, and then put your spacer down, then attach your next piece of tape and pull your spacer up and go to the next one, and then just repeat this process all the way across the board. Take the next darkest color of paint that you're going to be using and paint the open spaces, including on top of the paint that was previously put there. This time we're going to leave those vertical pieces of tape on, let your project completely dry, and now we're going to repeat the first taping process by going over everything one more time, including the spacers. This part is really important because if you take off those second pieces of tape, you're not going to get the right effect. So make sure you just follow these steps and you'll end up with a beautiful pattern of buffalo check. There will be just some little squares that are open to be painted. As you can see here, I've just got little squares in my darkest color of paint. And once I'm done painting, I can go ahead and remove all of the tape and reveal a beautiful buffalo check pattern. This is so pretty with the blue, but it would look beautiful in other colors too. I've got a piece of faux fur that I picked up at the fabric store, and I'm using just this black bowl to trace out a circle. This is going to be the body of the bunny. I used the paint can to cut out a circle for his head, and now I'm just going to freehand some bunny ears. I did a stand-up ear for one, and then the second one is going to be flopping down. If you're not good at drawing bunny ears, you can definitely find all sorts of different patterns and images online that you can print off and trace. Once I've got all of my pieces cut out, I'm just going to go around the edge with my hands and pull off any of the excess fur that just might be hanging around there. I don't want this flying all over the place once I put it together. I'm going to start putting the bunny together the way I want him to be, and at the end I decided that he needed a couple of little feet down at the bottom and a little blue bow. I love how this guy turned out, and I hope you love him too.
DIY number one is using this galvanized pot from the Dollar Tree. And what I'm going to do with this is take a regular kitchen sponge and some chalk paint. This is Martha Stewart chalk paint in the color clay. And I'm going to dab it all the way around the pot. I just want to make sure that the lettering is covered up, but I do want a little bit of that galvanized metal to show through. The reason I'm using the sponge is because I don't want to see any brush strokes. While I wait for the pot to dry, I'm going to mix up some textured paint. I'm pouring in a latex paint. This is just something that I had left over in my house, and I'm pouring it right into a little plastic container that has a screw top lid. As you can see, I save all of my jars. I added a couple tablespoons of baking soda. Now, with this technique, you want to add a little bit first and then add more if you need it. I found that I did need a little bit more just to get the consistency and the texture that I wanted. What I'm doing now is just taking this little brush and I'm pouncing it right on top of the other color, and I'm getting a really wonderful concrete kind of look. I'm getting some bigger chunks here and there and some smaller chunks, and I'm just going to keep going all the way around the pot until I get the look I want. Once the paint was almost dry, I'm taking the same sponge and the same original color, which is the darker color, and I'm just kind of sponging it on because I want to get a little bit of a deeper shade, but I still want some of that lighter color to show through. So I'm going very lightly with my sponge and blending it in. I wanted to camouflage the little skinny handles on this, so I'm taking some of this white nautical rope that I have, and I started by hot gluing a piece of it down, which is what I'm holding with my thumb, and I'm just going to go ahead and start wrapping it all the way around the handles, gluing it in a couple of spots as I go. When I got to the end of the first handle, I decided to continue the nautical rope underneath the rim of the bucket all the way around. This way I didn't have to make any extra cuts to stop the rope, but it also made it look more high end and complete. Where I had to cut the ends, I just kind of let those edges hang down on either side of the handle, but I am taking a little bit of Mod Podge and I'm just going to run it across those edges so they don't fray even more. I have a new obsession, and that is printing on white tissue paper. I take a little piece of tissue paper that's just a touch smaller than the printer paper. I tape it across the top and about halfway down the sides, and then I run it through my printer like usual. And this is what I get, a beautiful little label that I can decoupage right on top of my project. I'm going to use Mod Podge and put a thin layer where my label is going to sit. Then I always use my brush to pick up my little label because they are really thin and sometimes it's hard to just place it right where you want it to be. If you have it on your brush, you can just kind of eyeball it and set it down right in the center. Making sure that I have a little bit of Mod Podge always on my brush. You don't want to have your brush too dry because that will tear the tissue paper. Start from the center and work your way out, gently pushing the wrinkles and the air bubbles out. This is a textured pot, so I know I'm going to have some wrinkles and bubbles in it, but if you have too many, you can do what I'm doing now. You just take your brush, make sure again it has a tiny bit of Mod Podge on it, just pounce up and down on top of the bubbles and the wrinkles, and they will just get pushed right into the Mod Podge underneath, and all of those bubbles will disappear. Now I'm going to blend in the edges of that tissue paper just a little bit. So I'm taking my sponge and I'm taking the lighter color, not the baking soda texture, just the regular paint. And I'm using the edge of the kitchen sponge to just go all the way around and camouflage that tissue paper. I also dabbed just a wee bit on top of the tissue paper where it's black just to show a little bit more texture and distressing. I'm going to be adding some eggs into this, but I wanted to show you a trick. I don't like filling all of my buckets and containers with so much foam or styrofoam that I end up wasting it. So what I do is take an old piece of cardboard, and I always save the sides and the lids from my Amazon boxes. The boxes themselves come in handy, but I always use the flaps for this. I'm going to cut out a circle so it fits into the bucket about an inch down from the top, and then I'm going to hot glue it in place. To camouflage the cardboard, I'm just going to scatter some reindeer moss all over the top of it. I'm not even going to glue it down because I might change my mind after Easter and use this bucket for something else. What I'm doing now is just taking some black paint and a stiff brush and flicking the paint onto the eggs so they get a little speckled. So I've got this sweet little bunny from the dollar store, and I went ahead and glued him down to the cardboard. And now I'm just going to glue the eggs just right onto the moss because they're not really going to go anywhere, but I just don't want any of them to fall out. And I can also then place them where I want them to be. Please excuse my black finger there. I didn't go and wash my hands after I flicked the eggs, and now it looks really awful seeing it here while I'm editing, so I do apologize. I've got some tiny eggs that I'm going to add into the mix as well, and I'm even going to give him one to hold in his little paws. I wanted to put some type of little sign above the bunny's head, so I decided to grab this wood slice, drill a hole in it so it would hold a bamboo skewer. I'm going to go ahead and glue the skewer in, then cover the skewer with some white butcher twine, and then write 5 cents on it and pop it in behind the bunny's head. I think this project turned out super cute. DIY number 2 is using this frame that I picked up at my local dollar store. It was $3. I really love the look of the frame itself, so I'm going to remove the backing, but I'm going to keep the glass in. Using the backing of the frame as my template, I'm just going to place it on a piece of white cardstock, and using my craft knife, I'm just going to cut around the edges to make it the same size. I'm using a ruler and I've just got it pushed out about an inch or so past the edge of the paper. And I'm just using a dry brush, dipping it in some of my favorite new color chalk paint, which is Eucalyptus from Martha Stewart. And I'm going to go ahead and just create some stripes all the way across the sheet. Using another color of green, this is Antique Sky from Martha Stewart, and it's a lighter green. I'm going to just go in between the dark green stripes, leaving a little bit of white peeking through. I found this beautiful vintage bunny family on Pixabay.com. I'll have the link for you down in my description box. And I'm going to go ahead and cut this out into a circle and then glue it right onto a piece of black cardstock. I cut the cardstock out as well in the black, leaving about 1/4 of an inch. And now I'm just taking a makeup sponge with a little bit of the eucalyptus paint, and I'm just kind of rubbing it around the edge of the white cardstock. This is just going to give it more of a vintage distressed look, and it'll also just help the white paper to blend in a little bit with that green background. Using my glue stick again, I'm just going to apply it to the back of the black cardstock and glue it into the center of the striped paper. I'm going to place it back into the frame, and this project is done. For this project, I'm using an oval wood cutout from the Dollar Tree. I've glued a piece of twine on it because that's just making it easier for me to glue these little wood jewelry beads on. These beads were a purchase from Amazon. They were an oops purchase because I thought they were much bigger than they are, but they happen to work out really well for tiered trays. So I'm going to go ahead and just glue all the way around the oval shape. This is what I have so far. I've left the bottom open because I'm going to be taking a 1/4 inch wood dowel and gluing that onto the back. I've also fed on a little bit of a larger bead that fits perfectly into the dowel, and I'm going to use that as some decor for the bottom part of the dowel. I didn't want the dowel to just be a hunk of wood. I wanted to dress it up a little bit. So this sign needs to stand up, so I'm taking 2 of the medium-sized tower blocks that I have from Dollarama, and I'm going to use some of Aileen's tacky glue to glue them together. I'm going to also clamp them until they're completely dry. Since I'm printing on white tissue paper, I decide to give the backing of the sign a couple of coats of white chalk paint. I printed this little vintage bunny, so I'm going to use Mod Podge to apply that to the sign. You want to be a little bit generous with your Mod Podge. You don't want it to be really thick, but you don't want it to be sparse. So just a good even amount on where the bunny is going to be. Then you'll just take the tissue paper and place it down. Now, once you've got it there, you can't move it because it's really thin paper. So what you'll have to do is make sure you've got it in the right spot. I like to pick it up with my brush like this and then just place it where I need it to be. Using a gentle touch and a brush that has a good amount of Mod Podge on it, I'm just going to go from the center out and smooth out the tissue paper. You need to have Mod Podge on your brush when you're doing this, otherwise the paper will probably rip. Then I'm just going to go around the whole sign and make it an even sheen with the matte Mod Podge. I'm also going to take the brush and pounce it as you see me doing here to get out any of the wrinkles and make the tissue paper blend in better with the sign. The 2 medium blocks were dry, so I took my drill and I drilled a hole into the center of it. It did go all the way through, which is fine, but then adding some hot glue and placing the rest of the dowel right inside those blocks will make it nice and sturdy and have it stand on its own. I was really liking the wood look of this against the white, but then I thought it needed a little bit of something. So I'm taking my Folk Art Home Decor chalk paint in the color Parisian Gray, and I'm going to paint the blocks down at the bottom, and then I'm just going to take that brush and dry brush the rest of the beads and a little bit on top of the bunny, just to give it more of an aged and antique look. So for my last project, I've got a crate for you. I'm taking 2 of the tumbling tower blocks and some of these bamboo sticks that I have. You could use popsicle sticks or craft sticks, whatever you've got on hand. And I cut them down to, I think, about 3 inches. I'm going to glue them onto the tumbling tower blocks, leaving a little bit of the block sticking out. I made 2 sets of those, and now I'm going to take a little bit of a smaller piece of the bamboo stick and glue the sides together. So the longer pieces will be the front and the shorter pieces will be the sides. For the bottom, I just cut out a piece of scrap cardboard and I'm going to just glue that on. So this is going to be a little egg crate. So I took some of this wood Excelsior that I have and I just pushed it into the bottom. And now I'm going to take a whole bunch of these darling little speckled eggs that I have in my stash. They were from last year. I picked up a huge wreath that had a ton of large and smaller eggs and I just colored them different colors and speckled them. So I'm just going to go ahead and place them where I want them to be, but I will be hot gluing them in place because I don't want them to fall out. Using a little scrap piece of wood, I'm going to paint it a couple of times with my white chalk paint so I can create a little sign for my crate. Using my stencil brush and this Martha Stewart chalk paint in clay, I'm going to go ahead and give this a dry brush. You can see I've glued my eggs so they're not falling out anywhere. I'm just going to go heavily around the edges and then just kind of dirty it up a little bit. I just want this to be kind of old and distressed. I didn't necessarily want the crate to be a different color. I just want it to look old and weathered. I want my sign to say Farm Fresh Eggs, so I'm just going to freehand it with a black Sharpie fine point marker, and I'll probably just thicken up the letters a little bit. Using just a regular thick marker, I'm going to go ahead and color the sides and the edges, and then bring that marker up just a little bit onto the front of the sign to make it look a little bit like an enamel one. I'm going to use a little bit of that clay chalk paint just to go over the sign a little bit, again, just to make it look old and weathered. Then with a bit of hot glue, I'll just put it on the front of my crate. Spring calendar pictures. I think this one is my absolute favorite. This little bunny with the sleeping position in the wreath with all of the eggs and the pretty flowers is just absolutely adorable. Now, if I would have been thinking this would have been really great for my next project because it's a round shape, but I only have one of these, so I ended up doing this to it instead. I'm taking a piece of white tissue paper and just adding a glue stick along it and putting it on top of this. I wanted this picture to be not quite so bright, more of a vintage look, something old and something that's been around for a while. Those colors are pretty, but again, just too bright for my style. So I thought this would work, and I think it did. I have a specific size frame that I'm going to put this bunny into, so I'm using my paper trimmer to trim down the edges. I also didn't have a larger piece of tissue paper and I didn't want any seams in there, so this ended up turning out to be the best project for this bunny anyway. I'm going to use the glue stick again and just apply this bunny sheet to the backing of the frame, which is right here. I believe it's an 8 by 10. Since there's a little bit of the backing still peeking through, I'm going to take some strips of drop cloth and make somewhat of a mat for this bunny picture. I'm going to just glue the strips with hot glue right along the bottom and the sides of the bunny, and then I'll be able to put it into the frame and there won't be any of the brown showing. I'll just trim off the extra edges and it will fit perfectly into the frame. The frame that I'm using was something that I've repurposed a couple of times. It had black on the bottom. I gave it one coat of Parisian gray chalk paint and just went over it very lightly with my sanding block to bring out some of the black and some of the original wood.
For this project, I'm using two of my Dollarama bunnies again, taking my flat Rust-Oleum matte finish spray paint. This is just the clear, and what this does is take some of the shine away from these bunnies so the paint has a better opportunity to stick. I'm going to give these two bunnies a few coats of white chalk paint. I did have to go over this 3 times to make sure that I got really good coverage, but I really liked the little dimpled texture of these rabbits because it still showed up even with 3 coats of paint. I love creating tissue paper transfers. That's what I'm going to call them from now on because they are transferring an image onto an object. You use tissue paper to print off using your regular printer, a laser jet or an inkjet. I have an inkjet. It works just fine. You use Mod Podge and you attach it to your project. Make sure you have some Mod Podge on your item first and then very gently lay your tissue paper on top. When you're smoothing it out, I always like to start from the middle and work my way out and always have a good amount of Mod Podge on my brush so I don't tear the tissue paper. Once they were dry, I sprayed them with a clear sealer. This one happened to have a little bit of shine to it and I really love how they turned out. I picked up this bunny on a little wood pedestal or candlestick at my local Dollarama store, and it is actually quite pretty just on its own. The back isn't finished, so that would be something that I would change anyway. And the florals were pretty, but just really not my style. So what I'm doing here is just painting the top portion of it gray. I'm also going to be painting the back of it gray, so it has the same look on both sides. And I'm going to leave the thickness on the sides of the bunny in white. I've got a buffalo check black and white napkin from the Dollar Tree that I've cut down into some strips, and I'm going to use Mod Podge and place it all along the side of the bunny in that thick spot. That's why I wanted to keep it white. So I'm going to very gently just press it in with my fingers and then continue working all the way around the one edge of the bunny, and then I'll do the other side too. Once the Mod Podge had dried, I just took this rough emery board and very gently just started sanding off the excess tissue paper. So the main reason that I painted the sides of the bunny gray is just to camouflage those bright colors from the florals underneath. Now I'm going to take a dry brush with some white chalk paint and go over the bunny and do it pretty heavily. I'm starting off fairly light to make sure that I don't go too heavy, but I end up doing about 3 or 4 layers of dry brushing just to bring out a little bit more brightness with the white chalk paint. I got this set of silicone floral stamps from bbcraft.com. And if you're not familiar with BB Craft, they have a ton of crafting supplies that are really not that expensive. And I do have a link for them down in my description box. I'm going to peel off these silicone stamps and then place them down the way I would stamp them to create a pattern. I'm starting off with some of the larger florals, and then I'm going to pull off some of the smaller ones and then add some bits of greenery as well. Now I'm going to take what's called the mask, which is literally just the sheet that covers up the stamps, and you'll be able to just press this down and that will become your surface of stamping. So all of the stamps will stick to this piece of plastic, and then you'll be able to ink it up and use it over and over again. The ink I use is just from a dollar store. It was $4 or $5 for this ink pad, and I really like it because the sponge part of it is nice and soft, so you get really good ink adhesion on your stamps. I'm going to very carefully place it on my rabbit and then hold it down with one hand and then use the other hand or fingers to just press down very gently, trying really hard not to move the stamps. I like how this pattern turned out. I think it's really pretty. It has just enough amount of greenery and stems, and this looks so pretty against the rustic background of the bunny. I'm going to go ahead and ink up the stamps again and then just turn the stamps so they don't go on exactly the same way. And then I'll be able to just fill up the bunny. I think I've finally mastered the messy bow, and I really enjoy making them now. I used to kind of dread making them because they wouldn't turn out, but I've kind of embraced the not so perfect look of them. I'm taking some of this wider ribbon from the Dollar Tree in a beautiful gray color, and I'm just going to be trimming it down into 3 narrower pieces. I also have some black and white twine. I have some cotton rope that I'm going to be pulling apart, and I also have some buffalo check ribbon that I'll also be cutting down a little bit narrower. It's been easier for me to lay down a piece of twine up and down like you see me doing here, and then laying my ribbons across, and that just makes sure that I have something to tie everything in place once I'm done. So I'm just going to start layering my ribbons in not really a pattern, but just kind of grabbing them moving them around every which way and just trying to make sure that they all stay in place. This gray one was really giving me a hard time. Once I felt that it was fluffy enough, I took the piece of twine and then just simply tied a really snug knot, making sure that it was in the center. I fluffed it up a little bit and kind of bent some of the ribbons down so they'd be hanging, and then just trimmed off any of them that were a little too long. Then I'm going to just glue this right on top of my bunny and give him a sweet little bow right at his neck. I finally found my stash of buttons, so I added a white one. I'm also going to add a few little greenery sprigs and some pretty pink flowers. For the final touch, I added a couple of pieces of greenery to the bottom of the candlestick and added a couple of pink flowers there too. I really love how my bunny turned out, and I hope you love him too. I really hope you enjoyed these $8 store Easter decor ideas. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. That black arrow will point you in the right direction, and hit that notification bell. You don't want to miss out on anything else I have to share.